Hi everyone, my name is Zoe, and what I'm going to be focusing on for today's lecture is what we call soft skills in Extemp. In particular, I'll be looking at handling tournament pressure, and then we'll discuss humor a little bit at the end. So, this is me. I am a rising senior at School Without Walls High School in Washington, D.C. And I've been competing in Extemp since the end of my freshman year, but really started doing more NatCirc stuff this year. The one thing I want to highlight here before we get into the content is on top of like dealing with Extemp and the stress of Extemp and learning Extemp, career is starting the speech and debate program at my school. And I know that's a big thing for a lot of you coming from schools that don't have big established programs. And that comes with the increased burden of like logistics and everything like that. And so that's something I'm always more than happy to talk about because it's a lot to deal with. So that's me. That's kind of it. Here's what we're gonna be dealing with today. We're gonna start by talking about why we're even talking about soft skills and Extemp, what I mean when we're talking about soft skills. We're gonna move on to talking about wellness and Extemp because knowing Extempers and therefore knowing you guys, I know that means that you probably don't sleep or touch grass a ton, to be totally honest. My goal is to help address that a little bit. And then we're gonna sort of narrow in on what that looks like in the context of a tournament and how you build a routine in order to A, compete well, and B, actually take care of yourself. And then at that point, once you're sick of hearing from me, I'm going to share some advice from folks that I'm sure you're familiar with who are super successful and have done some awesome stuff on the NatCirc and have their own tournament routines. Because ultimately, the way you sort of succeed in building a routine and like limiting stress is by doing what's best for yourself. And so I want to share how different people have been able to do that. And then we'll talk a little bit about humor, both in Extemp and then also how it's related to this sort of higher level discussion of like how do we keep ourselves sane. And then I'll share some parting thoughts and we'll all move on with our days. So you may be thinking, Zoe, what am I even doing here? What's the deal with these soft skills you keep mentioning? And if that's what you're wondering, then you ask some brilliant questions and are well on your way to mastering soft skills in Extemp. And I'm going to answer that question. So, when we're talking about soft skills, a lot of the time you're hearing it in the context of like corporate jargon, but really what we mean is just anything that's not technical but necessary to succeeding. So, in the context of Extemp, that's the things like how do you stay calm at tournaments? How do you interact with judges and fellow competitors in order to like maintain the atmosphere for yourself that allows you to succeed? So, that's anything that's important for Extemp that's not the Extemping itself. So hard skills are something like substructure. It's something like humor. That's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with everything that's outside of that. And the point of soft skills is that you can sort of cultivate them to be specific to an event like Extemp. But when you're building on these things like responding to pressure and, developing relationships with other competitors and judges, whatever, that's relevant beyond Extemp. So if you're competing in Worlds, you're competing in Congress, or you're like just trying to be a person in the world and go to school, apply to college, whatever it is, my hope is that these soft skills can apply to all of that as well. You may be wondering though, why bother even talking about soft skills? I don't know about you guys, but like I grew up in the era of like very bad social emotional like learning in elementary school where they would sort of like berate us about the importance of like staying calm and being mindful, and it felt really really stupid and disconnected from my real life. And so I want to sort of show you all how this is relevant not just to your life as a person and like, prioritizing your own wellness, but also to your success as an extemper. And so I offer to you a cautionary tale. Um, for the sake of this cautionary tale, I have anonymized this story a little bit. But for some context, when I was in middle school, way back in the very beginning of my journey doing speech and debate, I had, as I'm sure many of you do, like a mentor who was a couple years older than me, who like really guided me through getting into speech and debate. We'll call him Carlos for the sake of this. And Carlos was a pretty good extemper, and he was a really, really busy guy. He was busy doing Extemp. He's broken at a couple NatCirc tournaments. He has a couple titles. He's team captain. And at the same time, he spends a lot of time coaching novices like me. And he was running the newspaper at his school. And he was competing every weekend, often in multiple events, because Carlos was like, no, I can't just do Extemp. I'm also going to do LD because I hate myself, whatever it is. So this guy is really, really busy. And If we go way back in time to 13-year-old Zoe Becker, one day she's walking down the street and she's thinking about her PF cases because unfortunately she's a PFer at the time. And she really doesn't know what to do about this one contention. And so one of Carlos's novices, aka me, decides to text him to review a case. Normally he responds right away. But on this particular day, he doesn't. So she calls him because he normally picks up right away. And again, he doesn't. So Zoe Becker's like, okay, whatever, like I'll deal with this stupid PF case later. Everything will be fine. And I don't know, an hour later, Carlos calls her back and he's like, hey, I'm so sorry. I didn't get back to you as fast as I usually do. I was at the hospital. And so hearing this, I say, hey, what do you mean you're at the hospital? And what Carlos goes on to inform me is that his appendix had burst from stress, which naturally, lands someone in the hospital. And I say all this to tell you that stress management isn't just something that's important in the abstract, but if you are devoting every hour of every day to Extemp and a million other things, it will come to affect you on a physical level. So not only is that bad just because like you all should be healthy and deserve to be healthy to the extent possible, but you certainly can't compete if your appendix just burst and you're in the hospital. So that's why it's so important to talk about these soft skills, because we can ignore them and ignore them and ignore them like Carlos did, but eventually it catches up to you. You end up at the hospital, not at a tournament, and that is not fun for anyone. So with that in mind, I want to talk about wellness and Extemp and what that looks like. And I'm going to go through this section and then I'll check in on the chat just to see what's going on over there. But before I do, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute really quickly before we continue. Okay, cool. Then I shall move on. There's not a lot to this. You guys really, really, really need to sleep. So I will preface this by saying that for people as busy as many of you are, sleeping is difficult. If you are doing Extemp on top of a really intense school schedule and a lot of extracurriculars, and maybe you're taking care of family members and you also have a job that's a big time commitment, there's an inherent sacrifice of your sleep schedule. And I'm not trying to convince you all that you need to get, 12 hours of sleep every night, because the reality is that for a lot of you, as ambitious and busy as you are, that's not possible. What I do want to communicate is that it's not worth sacrificing sleep time for prep time. So I think it's pretty common to get into this cycle of, oh my gosh, I have a tournament on Saturday. It's Thursday. I haven't prepped enough. Oh my gosh, I don't know anything that's going on in the DRC. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay up till 4 a.m. reading about the DRC, and then I'm going to give a speech about it. That way I'll be so prepared for this weekend. And in the moment, especially, when it's 11 p.m. and you're not thinking straight, that feels like a great idea. The problem is it is usually more harmful than it is helpful, because by doing so much work when you're tired, you only put yourself in a worse position for competing because your brain isn't functioning fully. And I want to give you guys some actual like hard data for this, because I'm sure you're all used to hearing people say, oh, like sleep is so important, it's so important. That is really, really true. So there was a 2019 study from researchers at MIT who found that 25% of the differences in grades in students, in high level classes could be attributed to their sleep schedule alone. So what that means is that 25% of the difference between success between two students had nothing to do with how hard they were working. It had nothing to do with how smart they are. It had nothing to do with how much time they spent studying. The only thing that was making that difference was whether or not they chose to go to bed. And relative to, putting in a ton of extra prep time, going to bed is a choice that's pretty easy to make that will not only preserve your sanity and your wellness, but can also really help on the concrete level of like doing better in school or similarly doing better in Extemp. So my take is that like at least 75% of the time, if you're feeling overwhelmed about a tournament and it's already late at night, the right thing to do is to just sleep on it. You're not going to do productive prep at 2 a.m. Your brain already isn't functioning that well. Give yourself the benefit of the rest and return to prep when you're fresh. More on the sleep note, and I also just wanted to make sure to share this resource with you all. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this already, but the Yale admissions office produces a really great podcast about the college admissions process at Yale specifically, but it's broadly applicable to similarly competitive schools. And every year they run an episode where they interview live at their admitted students weekend students who have just committed to Yale, and they reflect on the application process and the things they did in high school that they thought allowed allowed them to be successful. And I would highly encourage you all, with whatever time you have, to go back and listen to the episode from this year's Admitted Students Weekend, because what you'll notice in the interviews with students is so many of them bring up the fact that they think they were successful because they carved out time for rest and they carved out time for sleep. And these are like highly successful, competitive students who you may have a mental image of them being very cutthroat and pulling all-nighters all the time in order to, succeed to the level they did, whether it's in speech and debate or sports or whatever it is they were doing. But the fact of the matter is, like, the people who end up standing out are the people who are able to pursue what they love to the fullest degree because they are well rested. So that is the end of my treatise on sleep, but truly, genuinely, I cannot emphasize it enough. You just can't compete well if you're not the fullest version of yourself. I guarantee you, if you talk to folks who are super successful, on the national level, they go to bed really, really early. And that really does make a difference. So the next thing I want to highlight is this article from a school newspaper, from an all-girls school in Pasadena, California. And this was published by a student at this school in 2021 for the school's Mental Health Awareness Week. And what this student chose to write about was how she chose to quit speech and debate for the sake of her mental health, which, if I had to guess, is a thought that a lot of you have had at some point or another. Because the fact of the matter is that speech and debate, if you're not making the active choice to take care of yourself, can be really, really taxing on your mental health. So I want to look at this article a little bit and pay attention to what this student said, and then also what you can do to avoid ending up in her situation. So in this article, this student, Ella, reflects on the fact that she was habitually going to tournaments, competing at 3 events at a time, and just like feeling super, super burnt out, to the point where the benefits of speech and debate no longer outweigh the harms. And there are a couple of things I want to draw your attention to here. First is, this student throughout the article reflects her inclination to always compete in as many events as possible. And that makes sense, right? Like, all of us, I think, can admit that we are naturally competitive. We want to feel like we're the best at something, we're doing a competition. I think it's really important to accept, as early in your career as possible, to the extent that you can, that there will always be people who do more than you. And that's how life works. There will always be people who do more extemp than you. There will always be people who do more extracurriculars than you. There will be people who apply to more colleges. There will be people who do more in that college. Relentlessly pursuing doing the most is never going to be sustainable, especially when it necessarily requires you to sacrifice your wellness. Instead, choosing to prioritize your wellness can allow you to do the most in the activities that you really enjoy and where you really want to thrive. The second thing, which should be a common sense thing, I hope, but also that I'm sure many of you have had the inclination to do at some point or another, is just like, don't do 3 events at every tournament. Something this student talks a lot about in her article is that she was constantly competing in 3 events at a time. That is so, so much. You're going to get so tired if that's what you're constantly doing and splitting your energy between so many things, whether that's within speech and debate, whether that's doing DX and IX at one tournament, whatever it is. Um, you can make the choice to just do less. And also,
I think
yes.
you got disconnected.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Everyone good?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. I will check the chat really quickly. Okay, awesome. Then we shall continue. Um, don't do 3 events at every tournament. Just don't. There will always be pressure to do more, but there will also always be people who are doing more than you. So, like, don't get caught in that cycle. Choose to do the things you care about. So, like, for me at the beginning of my career, I was a pretty intense LDer before I got into Extemp, and I made the choice midway through my sophomore year, like, I'm just gonna do Extemp now, because I knew I wouldn't be doing Extemp as well as I wanted to do it if I was spending a ton of time doing LD as well. And there are people who really successfully do both, but you don't have to be that person. You can succeed more and enjoy more, if you accept that life is sort of a series of compromises. I don't want to belabor this next point too much, but one of the things I would tell this student writing this op-ed about how miserable she was at every tournament is sometimes you have to take the small steps of eating real food, drinking water, asking people for help when you need to. And I'm sure you guys get plenty of this in like, emotional like Instagram infographics and from, friends and family and whatever, but that is important. And I feel like I would be sort of misguided to not bring this up once. So yes, do all those things. But most of all, what I noticed reading over this article is what this competitor is talking about, what led her to quit speech and debate, right? So that precludes her from having any further competitive success, is that she's never in this article talking about her tournament records. She's talking about how she felt. She's talking about how miserable she was. Because even though in the moment it feels like your ballots are the things that matter more than anything else, 2 weeks out, 2 years out from a tournament, the thing that sticks with you, the thing that goes beyond the sort of like literal what do you remember into the what do you hold on to is how you felt. And so you have to start by prioritizing how you feel, because that's what keeps you coming back to the activity. And if you don't have an incentive to come back to speech and debate anymore, then you're certainly not going to be able to succeed. So if you take nothing else away from this, I hope that it's that speech and debate is something that should be fun, that you should feel good about. And if you're not, then like now is a great time to like reevaluate your relationship with Extemp and like figure out what you can do to really have more fun. Because otherwise you'll end up in this, honestly really unfortunate situation where, you're just not competing anymore. So, with that in mind, I bet you're thinking, Zoe, all of that sounds great. I've learned my lesson from this anonymous student. I'm going to be totally healthy going forward. I'm, never going to not sleep enough or have junk food ever again. But I have a problem. Tournaments are still stressful. What do I do about that? And this is something a lot of you expressed. You have a lot of general anxiety about tournaments, like, oh, what if I go into the prep room and forget everything and draw a question I know nothing about, and then the universe explodes, and then my coach and my parents both appear in front of me and tell me how disappointed in me they are, and everything is bad. That's a natural way to think. That is also catastrophizing, and that is anxiety. And those are things that can be dealt with. So we're going to deal with them now. This is a piece of advice that was passed along to me through some other folks on the circuit that originally came through McKinley Paltzik. And the advice that she often gave was to find 2 or 3 people you deeply enjoy and to find them at every tournament. That is basically a fancy way of saying that you should let yourself have friends at competitions, whether those are teammates, whether those are people from other schools. Finding people that you like being around, people who you enjoy being around, and people who it doesn't take energy for you to be around is really a game changer when it comes to competing. Because in those stressful moments after a round that didn't go really well, or when you're anxious and breaks are coming out, you can refocus your energy on just like enjoying the situation you're in and the people that you're with. And finding those 2 or 3 people is a good way to just feel safe. I'll get to the hand in just a second. And like let your guard down. Being around people who make you feel safe and protected is a natural way to sort of lower the level of anxiety you're feeling, and can make a huge difference. Abir, I saw your hand was up. What's going on?
Yeah, so like I've got some teammates and these teammates they like I've debated with them a few times because they're very experienced teammates, but they kind of like end up getting very angry after they lose, like literally just like blaming others. And
Yeah.
then it takes a toll on my mental health. Like I want to like stop debating at that point because like I'm being blamed for everything because I'm the first speaker. So they're like, hey, you did this wrong, hey, you did that wrong, and because of you we lost and stuff. So like should I change my teammates because they're very experienced, that's the only reason why I stick with them, or should I continue to debate with them?
I don't know if I can give you specific advice about like your teammates because I don't know the extent of your situation, but I will say that there is a broad tendency among, extempers and people in the speech and debate world more broadly to like take it really hard when a round doesn't go well. And I think that's a normal thing to do, but I think that's the time when I would point you back to this advice of like just remove yourself from the situation. Find the people who make you happy because you can't compete if you're just always surrounding yourself with things that are stressing you out more. What I want to highlight here is like there are no rules other than whatever rules that your team has for how you have to act at a tournament. If something's not compulsory, it's not compulsory. Seek out the people you enjoy. Let yourself just have fun with them. Talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. Because that's what's going to let you continue working. And I think there's a tendency among extempers, we'll all be getting lunch together, it's between rounds, and everyone's just like going around in a circle saying, oh my gosh, I'm so cooked. This is how bad my round was. I bet I went straight sixes, blah, 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 blah. And next thing you know, it's like your turn to like jump in on the pile up of like how bad everyone is doing. I think the best thing you can do in that situation is just change the topic of conversation. It's really natural to go around and like be self-deprecating because we're anxious, but you only make your anxiety worse if you join in on the train of like, wow, we're all doing really bad. We're probably all going to lose this tournament. That means I'm going to lose too. Everything's terrible. Find a group of people who are not interested in having that conversation. When you're not in round, you don't need to be talking about the round. Talk about the things you enjoy talking about. If that's Extemp, that's awesome, but I don't think it's ever been productive for a group of people to sit in a circle and just talk about how they think they're doing really, really badly in a given tournament. So, in terms of your actual tournament routine, I think it's really important that you build a routine that works for you and also that is consistent so that every time you travel for a big tournament or every time you go to a local, you're not having to replan what your day and what your week is going to look like. Because by doing that, you give yourself a lot of decisions to make, and decision fatigue is a real thing. If you're spending your energy on deciding what you're going to do the night before a tournament, that's more energy you don't have the next morning, and that's more anxiety you're producing for yourself. So here's my general guidance for what a tournament routine can look like, with the key caveat of the fact that a good tournament routine is the one that works best for you. And I think trial and error is really important. So, before one tournament, maybe see what happens if you give a speech the morning of. Hated it? Great. For your next tournament, don't give a speech the morning of and see how that changes things. Starting with before your tournament. If you're traveling, I think it's really important that you build a travel routine that works for you. So decide in advance, are you going to eat at the airport? Are you going to bring your own food? Are you going to spend time with teammates? Are you not? I don't think there's a right thing to do, but you have to know yourself as an extemper and a competitor. Is it going to give you energy and motivation to be with other people or not? The night before, I've said it before, I will say it again, please just go to bed early. All right, so you get through all that, you have your great night before tournament routine. Like for me, I always watch The Office in my hotel room if I'm traveling for a tournament, fall asleep early, feeling great, wake up feeling rejuvenated. The morning of, you don't want to have to think about anything other than your speeches. You don't want to have the variables at play of, oh shoot, like where's my suit and where's my room and what's going on? So get up, get ready, go find your people right away. Find the prep room early, because the earlier you get there, the less variables there are at play about like how to sort of deal with like, let me rephrase this. If you're not dealing with the variable of, oh shoot, like there's no suit in the prep room, then my gosh, there's no seat in the prep room, you're able to be much more focused on what you're actually speaking about. So I would always suggest getting to places early, build that routine of like what it looks like for you. Maybe that's like practicing where you're going to pace. Maybe that's finding your rooms, and then build that routine for during rounds. So like, I know a lot of extempers have a specific timeline. Okay, this is the song I play when draw starts. This is the song I play when I'm pacing. This is the song I play, when I'm going up to the draw table. Whatever it is, get yourself into a routine for that. And then, okay, you're feeling good, you're in a routine, you're able to sort of minimize your stressors by minimizing the amount of decisions you're going to make. And then all that falls apart because breaks are about to come out. So my suggestion is to build a routine for this as well. Because if you wait until the moment of to decide whether you're going to be with teammates or you're going to be alone when breaks come out if they're blasting on tab, and whether you're going to go get food before breaks or not, then you give yourself a lot to spiral about, because now you're not just spiraling about breaks, you're spiraling about whatever it is you need to do. So I would encourage you to decide in advance what getting ready for breaks means. But most importantly, I'd encourage you to take your mind off of Extemp in some way or another, because if you're done competing until breaks come out, everything is out of your control. You've done everything you can. It's now in the hands of tab. So there's no point in fixating on what you've done so far. During rounds, do your thing, rinse and repeat between days. Take some time to rest, and set goals for your prep. So, like, okay, today I'm going to run one speech before I go back to competing tomorrow, and that's it. Because if you don't do that, you get caught in the cycle of, oh, shoot, I feel like I didn't do well enough today. I'm going to run speeches till midnight. And then, you end up in a really rough situation, exhaustion wise, for the next day. So I want to talk a little bit more about tournament rituals and superstitions because I think what's really common among extempers is, they have, their lucky jewelry or the playlist they always listen to, the suit they always wear, the headphones they always wear for a specific tournament. And I think that's great. I think the more things you have that bring you comfort before a round, the better. So for me, I decided to embarrass myself and put a screenshot up here of the very first tournament playlist I made. This was my freshman year. This was the playlist I always listened to before round. And like, it just got me in a more relaxed state of mind. Because I was like, okay, I've done this before. No round has ever been catastrophic. If I listen to this playlist before the round, then like, this means that it'll work again when I listen to it now. And I would highly encourage you all to find those things that bring you some sense of comfort before round. And I also want to give a little bit of a word of caution because routines will be broken. That is how life works. Sometimes your lucky suit will shrink in the wash, or you won't be able to find your favorite Pilot G2, or Spotify will be glitching, and you're not going to have your perfect tournament playlist. And I think it's important to be able to adapt to those moments because I've noticed a tendency among extempers to believe that the reason they succeed is not their hard work, is not their skills, but it is these tokens of luck. They're like, the only reason I do well at tournaments is because I have my lucky earrings. And so if they lose their lucky earrings, it's not just a question of the earrings anymore. It causes this spiral of like, oh my gosh, everything's going to fall apart because this one thing fell apart. And so I say that not to instruct anything in particular, but as a reminder to you that your competition and your success as an extemper is completely intrinsic and self-motivated. Nothing external, no playlist, no suit, no pair of earrings are ever actually going to have a tangible effect on what you do in round. And so latch on to those things to the extent that they're a force for calm in your life. But if you notice yourself falling into a cycle where you're more stressed about holding on to those rituals than you are able to use them as a source of relaxation, then ease off of them a little bit, because ultimately they should help you get yourself sort of back down to earth when you're in those stress moments. So yeah, that's just something that I think is important to think about and remember. So I just gave you a decent amount of advice for like how to stay chill at a tournament. One is like make decisions in advance to the extent that you can. Have rituals you can latch onto. I think good rituals, are physical things. For example, your suits, your earrings, whatever, having a playlist. But inevitably, you will panic at a tournament. All of you have expressed this. We all give speeches that are bad. There will be moments of the most intense imposter syndrome you've ever felt where you look at who's in a room with you and you're like, everyone here is really good. I have no idea what I'm doing, and so on and so on and so on. And my goal is not to convince you to get rid of these moments of panic, because frankly, I think I would be lying to myself and lying to you all if I told you that it was possible to get rid of them. Rather, I want to give you the tools to deal with those moments of panic at a tournament because tournaments are inherently stressful and you should be prepared to deal with that stress. So, the first thing that I will encourage, and that maybe not everyone will, but that has worked for me in my experience and I think is important to embrace, is a level of compartmentalization. Tournaments will always be stressful, and you're never going to be able to turn that off. But like, let yourself go play Cards Against Humanity with your friends. Go get a cup of coffee before the round if you're not going to be too hopped off on caffeine. Anything to ignore the thing that you're stressed about. Because ultimately, that can make a big difference. If you spend time just sitting in your anxiety gets worse, you feel worse, you compete worse. That's not a great combo for anyone. The second thing I want to introduce to you all is what I call the overdue paper model. And this is a story that my dad has been telling me for years and years and years about how one night when he was in college, he was pulling an all-nighter because he had a paper that was due the next day and he had not started on it. And he was in full panic mode, like spiraling on the brink of an anxiety attack type of thing because he could not get this paper done. And his roommate turns to him at one point and his roommate says, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I don't know, I'm panicking." And his roommate says, "Okay, what are you supposed to be doing?" And he goes, "Well, I'm supposed to be writing my paper." And his roommate says, "Okay, is the panicking helping you to write the paper?" And the answer is obviously no. My point with this story is to illustrate to you that extreme panic and anxiety is not in and of itself productive. So if you find yourself getting caught in a spiral of, oh my gosh, I just realized I didn't answer the question as fully as I should have last round, and your spiraling is not constructive, it's not here's what I'm going to do next round to improve, but you're just spiraling, remind yourself that there is no productive end to that. That doesn't help you as a competitor. So let yourself take a step back from the panic by remembering that the panic itself doesn't add anything to your life. The other thing that I want to highlight is it's really common to feel anxiety at a tournament. And when it comes down to it, anxiety is something that's physiological. It's not something that's rational. So if I'm feeling really anxious about a speech I just gave, the fact of the matter is I could be stressed about the speech, but when I start to feel physically anxious, when my palms start sweating, my stomach hurts, whatever it is, that's not actually about the speech. That's your brain in fight or flight. And at that point, I think it's important that you respond to the anxiety, not the stressor itself. So don't just go give a ton of practice speeches and assume that that'll make your anxiety go away, because that anxiety exists on a physical level. Take the time instead to do things that will calm you down on that physiological level and take deep breaths, drink some water, have some food, talk to people, because the problem that you're dealing with at that point of panic is not rational. The last thing is I think a lot of extempers have a tendency to associate stress with doing something wrong. If I'm panicking at a tournament, then it must mean that I'm not as good as all these people who seem to be able to, walk into the prep room so nonchalantly, do whatever how they want. And I don't think that's true. Stress just means that you care. And so I think it's okay to embrace the fact that you're stressed and that you care about your results and what you're doing. I just think you have to be mindful of when that stress crosses over into the territory of anxiety and panic. And at that point, you have to take the appropriate steps to sort of walk back just into stress and care territory. Because once you're in panic territory, you're actively harming your own wellness and your competitive chances. Above all, Extemp isn't sustainable if you don't enjoy it. So prioritize the people who add for your life. This is a really, really flattering picture of me and my teammates at NCFLs. Enjoy Extemping. Like, you can't keep coming back to this if you don't love it. And you all are here carving out a week of your summer to like sit on Zoom talking about Extemp. So I know that you all love it. And so in those moments of stress, remind yourself of it. Like sometimes I will literally like pull out my notes app and start making a list of why I love Extemp and why I love being at tournaments. And all of a sudden, all those stressors feel a lot smaller because you're just doing something that's really exciting. You get to be engaged with the world and your teammates and your friends. And I think that's a really great way to get out of those moments of panic that are totally natural. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, Zoe, I'm sold. I'm going to start thinking intentionally about managing tournament pressure. I'm going to focus on creating a sustainable routine, about having fun and Extemp. But I'm sort of sick of hearing you talk. Are there any other people who can weigh in? And the answer is absolutely yes. There are some wonderful, wonderful people whose advice I want to share with you in a moment. Before I do that, though, does anyone have any quick questions or comments? Yeah.
I have a question.
Whoop.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'll go then.
Emma?
So earlier, like you said you had like a playlist for
Yeah.
like rounds and stuff. So then is it like okay to like listen to music while you research for like the speech and stuff? Okay, great.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to pay attention to the rules and regulations of particular tournaments, but like having AirPods in, listening to Spotify, you're all good. Is there another question? Okay. I'm gonna keep going. I had some wonderful, wonderful extempers very generously share some advice with me about what their favorite tournament rituals and methods for staying sane at tournaments are. So I'm gonna play those for you. Someone please let me know if you can't hear the audio. But first up, we have some advice from the wonderful Onwin Williams, who champed NITALK this year, was runner-up at NCFL, NSDA semifinalist. She's the GOAT, and she has some pretty wonderful advice to share with you all.
Okay, for the tournament routine, eat a lot or enough for breakfast. Get some protein in there. You have to get gains and like stay awake, stay fresh. Don't forget.
Okay. Can you guys not hear that?
We can hear it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll check the chat really quickly. Okay, you can hear it. Awesome. We're gonna keep going then. Thank you all.
Too much caffeine for me personally, because then I'll talk really fast and my thoughts will jump everywhere. Not only like doing warm-ups before round 1, but if there's a long break or like breaks are coming out, whatever, also re-warming up when you feel like you're kind of a little dead on your feet. Another one would be listening to music before a round, but like some people I know will like re-give old speeches, but I listen to music and like do hand gestures and pretend like I am, but I'm actually like singing the lyrics to a song. Another one would be leaving time to scroll on my phone because then you don't have to think and it's really nice. And then also, if I'm gonna get like the competitive streak out, I play those iMessage Game Pigeon games and it really helps. Peace.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add to that, but I think like first of all, Onwin is hilarious and delightful, but there's some like really good stuff in there. Like play Game Pigeon with your teammates if like you need to get energy out. I also think that pacing while just saying the lyrics to a song is a great way to A, practice fluency, and B, get in the right mindset for a round. I'll often do it with like stupid, like fast songs. So that is a great piece of advice.
Okay.
Next up, we have the wonderful Lexi Toshov. I will not keep reading everyone's credentials, but everyone here has some awesome Extemp accomplishments and some cool tournament rituals to go alongside it.
Guys, I'm Lexi, and my biggest tournament ritual is listening to Nina Cried Power by Hosier, because I think it's a really nice song to remind us that like Extemp is supposed to be advocative and we're supposed to be fighting for people using our words. And then my biggest tip for staying sane at a tournament is whenever you get to a tournament site, scope out the building, scope out the college campus, wherever you are, and pick a place that feels like safe. Whether that's like a bench outside, if this is a college campus, maybe it's a hallway people don't really go to. If you get overwhelmed during the tournament, if a round doesn't go super well, if you don't really know what to do, you have that space to go back to. And it's like really nice for being able to, you know, stay emotionally even throughout the tournament. Anyway, good luck this season.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. Next up, you know her, you love her. It's Daphne, and she has some amazing advice for you.
Hey y'all, just some run-of-the-mill advice to stay sane during tournaments. The first, find a comfort food and force yourself to eat it. Earlier this season, I would get so nervous I just wouldn't eat during tournaments, but unsurprisingly, I'd get exhausted and really anxious. I picked out Nature Valley granola bars, and I forced myself to eat 2 before a round. It gives me the energy I need, but more importantly, it's also become a habit of mine, and so it calms me down whenever I eat one. Another thing I would recommend is having a trusted adult to talk to that's outside of the tournament after rounds. I think extempers have bad habits either to stuff down a bad speech, which will cause anxiety, or spiral out loud to a lot of people about it, and I don't think both is particularly healthy. I think if you have someone who is removed from the situation but knows you and knows how to talk you down, it can be really helpful. And finally, I wouldn't recommend prepping right before a round starts. The reality is, like, the newspaper articles you're able to find online and, like, questions you frantically thought about 20 minutes before you draw are oftentimes not really gonna help you. In, like, the 20 tournaments I've done this for, I can only think of one instance where I pre-prepped a speech I would then later draw, and I ended up dropping that round. It's far more important for you to give yourself that time to relax. And, you know, that means different things for different people. I like playing Mario Kart. I know people like listening to music. Cards Against Humanity with friends. All of these work for different people.
Yeah. What I love about this is the emphasis on talking to people outside of the tournament, because tournaments can get super insular. So removing yourself from that by texting a friend at home or, you know, your parents if they're not at the tournament, whatever it is, can be a great way to get some distance from that stress.
Hey y'all, just some run of
Next up is the wonderful, wonderful Taya.
One of my favorite tournament rituals is actually, in order to try to get comfortable with the spaces that I'm going to be competing in, to go check them out before the round starts. So as soon as rooms blast for every round, I'll go and visit the room that I'm about to compete in and give a little fragment of my previous round speech or just a speech I did for practice in that space. I'm not sure whether or not it does anything, but for me, it was always a way to get confidence before a round actually begins.
And I think Taya makes a really amazing point here, which is that the rituals you have at a tournament, they don't have to be logical, but if you know that something will make you feel good, just do it. Because like that's how you're gonna compete in a way that's more enjoyable and successful. Next up is Sahana, who, guys, please send her a thank you email for coordinating this whole week so wonderfully.
Hi, I'm Zahana. I'm a senior from Ohio. I've competed in Extemp since 2022, and at final tournaments like Yale, the Blue Key Round Robin, as well as semifinal nationals for 2 years in a row, and final to Ohio States for 3 years in a row. My favorite tournament ritual for Extemp is probably, I would say there's 3. The first one is to sleep 8 hours before every tournament, because sleep is very underrated when it comes to Extemp, because you need to be well rested to focus and think in the spot and think critically. So sleeping 8 hours before a tournament helps me feel a lot more relaxed the day of. The second thing I like to do is to give a speech, like a normal 30-minute prep 7-minute delivery speech the morning of the tournament, and just run it like it would be judged by a judge. And then the final thing is the night before the tournament, I'll probably spend an hour just like reading on various topic areas just to see if I missed anything that's really important in a certain like region of the world. And that, is always a good habit to build during the week, but especially the night before in case, you know the topic areas for the tournament beforehand, but you haven't explored something. I hope that helps, and enjoy the rest of camp. Bye.
All right,
Hi, I'm Zahana. I'm a senior from
we're gonna keep it moving. Finally, with some advice from, the incomparable Anushka Gupta.
Hi, my name is Anushka, and my favorite pre-tournament ritual is spending some time alone. Oftentimes at tournaments, you'll find that after rounds, people will be berating their own speeches, talking about out rounds, or even discussing tournaments that have absolutely nothing to do with the one that you're at. So sometimes when I find that's making me feel a little bit anxious, nervous, or I feel inclined to join in, I like finding a quiet spot within the tournament building, maybe finding a bench outside, or even putting on my headphones and walking around just to spend some time alone within my own thoughts. That way, I don't get impacted by the emotions that are hanging around my fellow competitors, and so I don't feel influenced to say negative things about myself, even if that's kind of the culture of Extemp. If you do have a friend who might be experiencing the same thing, feel free to go and hang out with them whenever you need some time alone. That would be good in case you guys want to talk about things other than debate, maybe your personal lives or some fun stuff that's happening, so that you don't get as nervous.
Yeah, and I really love this. I think this goes back to some of what we were talking about earlier about how our natural inclination is to like just get in a group of a bunch of extempers and all go around talking about how terrible everything is going. And that's not productive for anyone. And it's awesome if you can like promote some high level change and convince other people not to do that. But also, the best thing you can do at the start for yourself is to remove yourself from that situation.
Hi.
So, you're probably now thinking, wow, Zoe, that was enlightening. It's so wonderful that these wonderful people did this all for you. And yeah, they're great. Extempers are wonderful. But you're also like, can you please teach me something that's actually about giving speeches? Honestly, I'm just jealous of how funny and charming you are. Can we discuss that? And the answer is always. So we're going to go on a brief digression about humor, mostly because I know it's something you guys haven't talked about a ton this week. But I promise it will circle back to our discussion on soft skills. So we're going to give some quick high-level notes on humor because I know we're running out of time. You may have noticed that over the last couple of years, there's been a shift away from humor on the national circuit. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. That does mean that when you do it, you have to do it well. And so I think there are 2 important things to think about when deciding whether or not to make a speech humorous. The first thing is to be mindful of the topic area. I'm an extemper who like usually leans pretty hard on comedy, but like I had a quarters question at Nats about like the protection of women in Afghanistan, and like obviously it wouldn't have played well if I just like started telling a ton of jokes about that. So you have to accept that like you need to make judgments about what's tonally appropriate. And then the other thing that I think a lot of extempers sort of struggle with is keeping their humor relevant. It should serve to further your point, not be an accessory to it. So what I mean by that is like if you get up and like tell an AGD about like, oh, like Marvel, and like you're like, oh, and Nayib Bukele isn't that different from, I don't know, this random character. It's Not just the problem isn't just that that's canned, it's that whatever story you've told about Marvel probably doesn't give us any further insight into your question about Nayib Bukele. So, like, what I generally encourage people to do if they're telling jokes is like tell jokes about the topic area specifically. Tell jokes about the people that you're talking about in your speech, because then the humor is actually a vehicle to give your audience information about what you're talking about rather than to distract away from it. And then in terms of delivery, I think humor delivery is something that we could spend another entire hour on, and that I'm more than happy to discuss if people are interested later. But the big thing is, you should have fun when you're telling a joke because jokes are funny. Let yourself smile. Pause after you deliver a joke. It's great if you get a laugh. If you don't, that's okay. Take it as feedback and move on. But you want to give that audience space to process your joke because you'll understand and process the punchline much earlier than they will. And more than anything, practice, practice, practice. Take videos of yourself delivering jokes. A lot of times, extempors have really funny premises for a joke, but they get caught up in the wording in a way that it doesn't land. So if you watch videos of yourself and notice like what your tendencies are in terms of sentence structure that may undermine your joke, that can be a great way to sort of amp up the humor that you're able to deliver in a speech. So I think a lot of extempors have a tendency to be like, okay, I need to be funny, but I'm not a funny person. What do I do? And the first thing I would say is remember that comedy isn't compulsory. If you're someone who's really drawn to extemp because you're drawn to, speaking in a poetic and, sometimes sadder way about major world issues, do that, be that person. Authentic extemp is always better than funny extemp that comes from an inauthentic place. But if you are someone who really loves comedy, first of all, hit me up. I'd love to talk more about it. But second of all, the best thing you can do as an extemper and as a comedian in general is just watch comedy. Like, yeah, Martin Short isn't going to be making jokes about, Donald Trump's economic policy, but he is a great example of what it looks like to draw out really funny and inane metaphors and analogies. And from watching all that and consuming as much comedy as physically possible, you can use those skills in your speeches. The other thing I would encourage you to do, whether it's in extemp or just like any personal writing, if you're focused on humor, always be writing comedy, and always keep a list of ideas for jokes you have. So I have a list in my notes app of jokes. I have a Google Doc that I just title speech fodder of like anytime I see a funny headline that I want to write a joke about, I add it to the Google Doc so I can can the joke if I want to. I keep a folder on Instagram that's fully just like reels that I think are funny that might be related to extemp, and so on and so on and so on. Humor is something that comes with practice, but I think like you can teach yourself the foundations by reading articles from a lot of great extempers and also a lot of great comedians about basic humor tenets like the rule of three, the way you establish a setup and a punchline, and the more comedy you consume, the better it gets. So you're like, Zoe, what just happened? Why did we just talk about humor for 5 minutes? I thought we were talking about soft skills and extemp. And this was very intentional because I think the two are actually deeply related. Humor itself is a great way to alleviate stress. Like, people aren't joking when they say that laughter is the best medicine. There's a lot of really awesome research to back this up. Like, on a physiological level, you can reduce your blood pressure, slow your breathing by laughing. So for me, if I'm stressed at a tournament, like, I'll turn on a TV show that I find really funny because laughing about it helps me calm down. But also, more to the point, for me, one of the reasons that I like to incorporate humor into my speeches is because it makes me more excited to speak, because I know that I'm going to have fun telling jokes and I love the feeling of when a joke lands. And that helps me calm down and come into extemp with a more positive mindset. And so I think humor is not just something that's valuable as a tool for competitive success, but it's valuable like for your sanity, because sometimes when things feel really, really overwhelming, the best thing to do about them is to laugh about them. So at this point, you're probably thinking, wow, Zoe, this was literally the best lecture I've ever seen. You're perfect and brilliant. Before I sadly depart, do you have any closing thoughts you want to share? And the answer is, of course I do. The first thing that I would remind you all to remember is that extemp is a game. It is not the end all be all. It's a game that you're trying to win, so you should be strategic, but it's important to have a full life outside of it. The second thing is, and you all know this, but I'm saying it again because you all need to hear it a million times over. When you have imposter syndrome and you're thinking, oh my gosh, everyone at this tournament is so worthy of being here except me, everybody else is thinking that way. And I think it's important to avoid the spiral of like all just going around and talking about how unworthy you are. But remember that everyone from novices to national finalists feel this way sometimes. And so use that as a reminder that like you can be anxious and also still be worthy of your spot and, be really successful and fulfilled. The other reminder I want to give, tournaments are stressful. That's okay. Stress means you care and it's not inherently a problem. It's just something to learn to manage over time. There's no right way to do extemp. For some people, being super social at tournaments is the right move. And for some people, it's really important to carve out time for yourself. Do what works for you. There are no rules. Every expectation at a tournament, unless it's, something basic like, oh, like be respectful, whatever, is constructed. And so you need to prioritize yourself and what's going to make you happy and keep coming back to this activity because that's ultimately the point. Find your people. After several years of doing this activity, I can confidently say that I don't think I would be going to as many tournaments as I'm planning on going to this year if it weren't for the fact that I love hanging out with extempers. And you're going to lose that incentive to keep giving 7-minute speeches over and over and over if you're not excited about the people you're surrounding yourself with. This activity has brought me to literally the best people in the world. And so I think it's important to like be open to that and the fact that like you can meet some of your best friends here. First of all, because it's just additive to your life. But second of all, like you compete better when you're happy and with people who make you happy. And of course, please, please, please go to bed. It will make a world of a difference. I will send out to you all this list of resources that I discussed over the course of the lecture. So the sleep studies we talked about, that article, some late night TV I highly recommend if you're interested in getting into comedy. But that's about all I have for you all. So I'm going to
Can
stop.
you show the links? Can you please show the links that
Oh
you
yeah,
just showed?
yes. Here are the links, and I'm going to email them out to everyone. I'll send them out on Discord, so if you're here, you'll have access to it. So no need to worry. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take some questions for the next couple minutes. Feel free to stick around. I'm going to pop into the chat and see what you all have left there. Okay. All right, the first thing I see, Melinda asked about warm-up recommendations. This is a great question. So I love doing like you'll all get access to the slides, don't worry about it. Like warm-ups with a big group, and I don't have a particularly big team. So sometimes like I'll literally just ask, like if there's a big team at a tournament, like at my locals, there's a school called Good Counsel that always brings a ton of people. And next starts, I will just like crash the Plano party and like join their warm-ups and do whatever like insane improv-y stuff they're doing because that's a good way to just get out extra energy. Other than that, I like redelivering old speeches. And then also like if I have AGDs and jokes that are canned, sometimes I'll just give those and like give an intro without a full body of a speech in order to just get myself in the mindset of like speaking and preparing to be in a room where, there are actually expectations of doing extemp. Leia asked how to not cram too much, stress out in rounds. Okay, this is a great question. So how to not cram too much, I think, is a little bit a matter of two things. First, it's a matter of discipline, of telling yourself, I'm going to prep for 1 hour and I'm going to stop no matter how prepared I feel. And that's really hard and also kind of all you can do. But I think the best way to sort of enforce the fact that cramming is bad is by like writing down somewhere, whether it's in your Google Calendar, your Notes app, whatever, a certain specific goals that once you reach it, you can feel like you've fulfilled something and no longer have an incentive to go back and keep cramming. The other thing is I think you can just fill your time with other things, like make plans, with your sibling. Okay, like, hey, do you want to watch a movie together tonight, like the night before a tournament? So obviously, don't stay up too late, but like, great, now you have something on your calendar that like literally physically prevents you from cramming. The other question is how to avoid stressing out in rounds and getting into the zone. And I think there are a couple things. First is that the normal techniques you hear about, take a deep breath, take a walk around the block, whatever it is. But in terms of getting into the zone, I think this is where the importance of having a routine really comes back in. If there are things you're used to doing before every round, so like for me, like there's one song I listen to before every single round. As soon as that sound comes on, I am naturally kind of in extemp mode. All of a sudden, nothing else matters. I'm listening and like getting ready to compete, and everything else sort of falls away. Can you please suggest some ways in which she can remain confident through this all? I'm going to avoid that question a little bit, just because I don't think I'm super qualified to talk about dealing with trauma in speech and debate, and I think that's a great issue to discuss. I'm blanking on the name right now. There was a great oratory a couple years ago about sort of the tendency to talk a lot about trauma in speech and debate. And I think if that's something you're worried about, I think yeah, Daphne, thank you. Solomized. I think if that's something you're worried about, that's something to work out among your teammates. But I think generally, if you're feeling particularly stressed about a certain topic or motion or whatever it is, that's a great place to apply the same sort of techniques we've talked about of just leaning into a routine and the parts of a tournament that make it fun, because ultimately the stress shouldn't be the dominant part. It is 1 o'clock, so if you all have, places to be, things to do, you're welcome to go do that. I'm also going to stick around if you have any questions. But thank you all for your attention. I hope this was helpful in some way, shape, or form. And I will drop my email in the chat. So if you have any questions about this issue in particular, about Extemp, or about like building a school program, please feel free to email me at any time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask, like at least as a beginner, I have like a ton of problems just like even finding 3 points or like making the full time limit. Like normally I just do two. Do you have any tips for like expanding like that
Yeah.
time? Like, yeah.
And I think something good to work on in sort of a more content heavy section. But I think one thing that's helpful for me in terms of like prepping 3 points, the first thing that can be helpful is like when you pull a question, just like jot down a list of like all the related ideas that come to mind. So like for example, if I were to draw a question about I don't know, like the US healthcare system. Okay, things that I know we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about rural healthcare, and we're probably going to want to talk about insurance, and we're probably going to want to talk about recent policy. And making a list of all those things can be a good way to naturally transition into, oh, whoa, there's a lot going on that you can funnel into points. The other thing is, I think you can start thinking about points as kind of, you can have a template. So, like, sometimes if I get an IX question that I don't know what to do with, I'll think through, okay, what would be a point about politics? What would be a point about the military? What would be a point about economics? Because almost regardless of what you're talking about, those three things are going to be at play. So I think thinking about those high level themes can be a really helpful way to generate points in round. Any tips on memorizing everything in the prep time? This is a great question. I think some of it comes down to adapting your prep split. So like if you're someone who's been like, doing 15 minutes preparing, 15 minutes practicing, and you're noticing you're getting into round and struggling to remember your sources, try cutting down to like 13 minutes preparing and 17 minutes practicing. That can be a good way to internalize things. And then other than that, I think it's just important that like you are really using your flow as an outline and not trying to sort of like dump a ton of information on it. That way you can just internalize sort of the high level structure. I'll take like 2 more questions and then I want to let you all continue on with your day.
This is like really random, but do you know any extempers with like ADHD? Because I was like, I don't know, I just have like a really hard time concentrating, and I feel like that affects my prep a lot. And even just now, when you were answering my question, I like completely zoned out. I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to be rude or anything.
8% of the extempers I know have ADHD. I'm only gonna put Sahana on blast right now. One of the things that she talks about that helps her is she uses like 3 different colored highlighters when she's prepping as a way to like just maintain her attention on her flow. And so I think like finding the silly things that like work for you in round can be a great way to do that. But I definitely wouldn't be worried about that as like something that's gonna prevent you from succeeding in Extemp. There are so many ridiculously successful extempers who also have like legit ADHD. Okay, Robert's working on getting his mic set up. So I'll take 1 more question while he's doing that, and then I gotta go have lunch. Anything else?
What are your biggest tips on like getting more funding from the school and the Parents Association for tournaments?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main thing I'd encourage in like funding a sort of self-run program And I think we talked about this a little bit. But first, remember that your speech and debate program is an asset to your school. And while, schools and parent associations may be hesitant to provide funding at first, you need to give the pitch that, like, if you have people competing and succeeding for the first time, if you have people going to NATS, whatever it is, like, that makes the school look good. And so I think you need to remember that you are offering something, you're not just asking something. And then I think, other than that, it's not fun, but, like, send a lot of cold emails, email people in the school administration, email local leaders, talk to your friends, ask if they'll get their parents involved, because the wider a network you can build, just the more people and the more resources you're going to be able to bring in to build something really successful over time.